Chopin, Brahms, they're like countries you visit or you like to be with, somebody's gaze or smile, and you feel like this is with Lily Boulanger. And her sevens. And Brahms sixths. And Chopin's right, left hand not doing the same. You know, it is the case. Every time you play music of a composer, you enter in their dreamland, in their imaginary, soulful world, outside even of their context of their time periods. Of course, we re-establish it in order to create some context, but ultimately it's timeless because it's something beyond their own selves and above. And they just left it for us. Is not incredibly generous? Of course, they paint a painting and we watch it. We don't need to repaint it. Sculpture, we didn't need to redo it and sculpt it. But living music, the score doesn't eloquently speak. It's what we make out of it when we bring it alive. For most purists or other professionals, it's not right, not supposed to be like that, fine. That's true. But ultimately, I find it more touching, the idea that, like for instance, Fauré, you think D flat major, accompaniments with 16th note rest and the flat 7. And the melodic line without any high point, just continuously unveiling its perfume. But the circle of fifths are more subtle in the composers than just the chord in its root position, obviously. And then you have Bach with his organ pedals and the melodic sixth ascending. And if you don't remember the piece, then you do something. It sounds like, but not. Of course, the not is more than sounds like. A Siciliana. In fact, it's because we play music from so many different styles, time periods, that if we want to inhabit that place with other than their own notes, at best we are plagiators, or perhaps just making pasticcios, or after all, we have their notes. Why imagine something similar, possibly or not in the same vein? I don't know actually why. I find it very liberating to just let the mind, the soul fly and just play. Not think of the interpretation, of the articulation. Just let it happen. Like when you know a piece for a long life long. It's beyond playing it. It becomes retelling it to yourself, like seeing an old friend and seeing, oh my God, you look so young. When I remember you when I was so young myself, and look at me now. And music is timeless, and the music doesn't age, but it is true that I find it very humbling, in fact. And it's not about, I don't know what it is about, actually, to be honest. Is it to avoid the expected, the fear of the wrong note? In improvisation, there is no wrong notes. It's all the notes are yours, and spontaneously so. And sometimes the idea that you develop a melodic thought until it ripes like a fruit, and then it's something to do with time, like the passage of time. And mostly the harmonic combinations of the sounds. A major 10th, D flat F, is not the same as the E flat G, even if it's supposed to be. Somehow we see different color. Then secondary voices dialoguing. And something very reflective, thoughtful. It can also be something very fleeing. And I think the voicing is like the sculptor of the keyboard. And then following the two in a dialogue between two persons with affection for each other. Of course, you can do it with Schumann fantasy or Chopin fantasy. You don't need to do it with your own fantasy. And I'm just indulging. And I wonder, what is the purpose of learning so much? Yes, the lament, the descending tetrachord in minor, and then repeating with variations is a chaconne or a passacaglia. But that doesn't mean much other than you can name it. It's just living it, imagining it, perhaps recreating it. So without the expectation to be special, I guess everybody wants to be special. It's just to be in it, in that mood, or that atmosphere. What is really liberating in improvisation is that you don't have to hold on the same style. You can digress like your thoughts do, or your fleeting thoughts, or your affections, or your memories, or sometimes your nostalgic feelings compared to what you live today. And it's sort of the soundtrack of one's life. You can start with Debussy. Chopin. is a melodic line. I find that to be the most meaningful part of music. It's the signature, it's the gaze, it's the perfume, it's the fleeting moment that is unforgettable. That's what it is. In the melody, you go, oh my God, this melody. And you expect it. What can it be? Step motion or leaps? So by itself, the facts are banal, but it's just the way it's organized with the harmonization or not, or somehow everybody looks like everybody else, since we're all humans in the sense of our humanity in us. So all music are not alike either. Obviously you have dissonances like in Stravinsky. Or you can do something like his earlier style with a model. But you know, tell you the truth, I don't even name the composers in my mind when I let my mind guide me, my daydreaming. And fortunately, through the teaching of many pieces, of whom I didn't play them all, but I feel like I did by teaching them, finger, phrase, pedal, organize, you end up by knowing the piece even better than if you have learned it yourself, because you teach it to somebody, and therefore you organize the process of learning, organize the process of practicing, until the process of performing, owning it, and then making it somehow, yeah, personalized, meaningful to yourself, you know. And then, in fact, the playing of the very piece like this should sound, in a way, at the full circle of learning that takes so much discipline, organization, repetitivity, practicing, and then inhabiting it with your own self, for what it means to you, regardless of what it meant to your teacher or to the people you admire listening to, for instance. At some point it's yours. Meaning the moment is yours, the fleeting moment when you play it. The legend of the Schumann fantasy. Because you know what is the next thing to come, but if you know it so well, then you just go on. So is it the hesitance that makes it sound more improvisatory? No, because that would be artificial, would be superficial, would be unnatural. They are written in rhythmic patterns organized by a group of bars. So the notation is rigid, the interpretation is freer by phrasing and breathing rather than organized only, but it has to be also within the structure of the notation. After all, we're here to serve the composer, and as a teacher I serve the composer through the student. So I take very at heart the details of the notation for what they mean and how we want to display them in our playing. And then comes this added moment of value where it's your own psyche, personality that resays it. It cannot be doctored, it cannot be spoon-fed, it has to be, as a teacher, I set the stage and they play what it means to them. And if it's away from the expected, let's say, middle of the road, in order not to, even if originally interesting, deserve them in front of a jury of inevitably purists, I want to have them succeed. And if the truth is outside of the box, then their playing will be considered eccentric, even if it's with the notes, not the wrong notes, the real notes, the right notes. But it's not just the notes and the rhythmic values, it's the phrasing, the legato. What kind of legato? Overstayed, or just speaking? direction, the elegance, the eloquence of the speech through the notes without words. And then you rediscover the piece through the student. Ways they didn't even imagine it, because it means such a different thing to the student, even if it's to the same score. So what do? I don't say, oh, you're not supposed to be, I didn't do like that, I didn't understand it this way. I wonder, did I misunderstand it when I was learning it, if it was the case? It's not because I'm not convinced of something, it's just that I'm tolerant, open to see, oh, they see something in it perhaps that can be brought this way. And that's why I think interpretation is considered today some kind of art on its own, when it was the emanation of the improvisatory composition by its own performers, composers in the past. Okay, now we have the differentiation and we have the grooves that are separate. And the knowledge is greater on the interpretations, besides of the composer's knowledge, different even earlier versions or handwriting. So in a way, we're almost over-informed. Does it perhaps, in a way, being my own devil's advocate here, perhaps we should allow this dialogue in ourselves, between our playing and our thinking, our projecting and our playing, like the conductor in us and the playing. And you're told not to slow down, but then you cannot not, because it means to you more than anything musically there, regardless of the indication of the score or not, and which edition or which whatever. Because it's so established for some of the famous pieces that you feel like you have to go through the grooves of the expected. And that's good too, because that's where you find the sense of your own truth compared to the objective truth of the score. But then the lessons are a moment where both teacher and student are trying to read in 3D what is behind the notes. What intention do I read or I misread? What intention do I imagine they had, and why did they interrupt it instead of developing, the opposite something? In other words, if you turn the page and you don't know what's the next page, can you guess it? And if you can, what does it mean? Okay, you know the style, but does it mean that the composer usually surprises us with something we don't expect, like a B section or something? So it's a very subtle situation where you have to be bringing to the student all your expectation and therefore also all your experience, and at the same time remain solid in your basis of the knowledge of how the piece is supposed to be built. But because it's a living matter, it's not like a painting or a sculpture or a film or something that is reproduced or observed the same way by reproduction. Music is not a reproduction. Music seems to be so, especially for competitions for classical music, but in fact the spark that brings the piece anew, even to people who know it. And of course the point of view is difficult to convey, because you have people who consider that they own the piece truth. I like to keep a door open. After all, these students come from all over the globe to work with me on and seek, trusting me, my advice, and not only how to learn it in terms of the technique, which is essential, without which there's no artistry, but also how to think it, how to organize it, how to shape it, how to display it, how to live through it in its own life, that is the time of the piece itself that it takes to. It's like You can connect it to a tradition, you can connect it just to your intuition, and the one might contradict the other. And especially when you have Cortot delaying the bass with the melody. It's so beautiful. It's not wrong. It's not written. And people in the 30s, when Cortot was playing, or the 40s, expected in a way that, I guess, perhaps the audience was also more educated for the music itself by being amateurs, more or less enlightened. Therefore, there was an exchange more than just an impression of the piece. They knew what it's about, and they came to hear the reading of this or that performer. And Cortot was so charismatic, but taken out of context, it sounds silly to dislike. Desynchronize. It's also very beautiful together. But you cannot stop the fact, even today, with even more recordings than before and available on a click, that people develop their own affinity for one or the other type of performer for that given piece. So it takes a lot for the performer to then convince you from another point of view from which they come, just like the students who come from so many different cultural backgrounds, and then we have to be in Vienna in 18 this or in Paris in 18 that with given composer's work. But then we are no more with the same aesthetics, hearing. We've heard things since then which they didn't hear. So we have to make abstraction of what we've heard from more modern music in order to appreciate the audacities of theirs. And we play it on instruments they didn't play. Or similar, but with longer value of the resonance and so on. So the tempi could be slower if you can have longer decay. Does it mean you should, like the steps of each beat of the Funeral March of Chopin? So is the tempo to do with the length of sound or with the mood that you consider funeral procession should be? Because if it is played, it's difficult to justify it. But if you play it super slow compared to middle slow, and you do it with a conviction compared to the more walking, and who defines that pace of walking? The metronome, the publisher, the editions, and the comparative editions, and all these music scholars. And I don't say that with any other than admiration for them. It's just that at some point the person has to play the piece, regardless how much you've read about it. Because at some point it has to mean for you in order to be meaningful to the others. You have to sort of unfiltered diffuse your inspiration to the audience for what you were inspired by the piece in the first place. You're sort of a medium when you're a performer. And if the piece is known by everybody, everybody's critical. If you play a lesser known composer, people compare it to a style they can connect their bearings to. And if you improvise, then they're lost because it feels like a little bit of everything. Especially the 2 against 3 rhythmically. as I make them up, just because in fact they exist in puzzle pieces of other pieces. They just don't make a picture together because it's not the picture of the piece. It's digressing, walking around this garden, smelling the roses, or observing it under the light of sunset or dusk compared to sunrise, and compared to the evocative quality of a major minor range, up or down, combined or not, dialogued or single melody, or just something without accompaniment that is imitational. Of course, when you sit down and you write down your thoughts, you just get rid of all these digressions. And digressions are very necessary. I think they're very freeing for the mind, especially when you're so disciplined learning the pieces it's written. And then if you don't allow yourself to inhabit it, of course you have to have the harmonic progression knowledge of which chords are more specific, not uniquely to a certain composer, like especially in Schumann, the augmented fifth with a major seventh on the third degree, especially if it's on a base of the dominant harmonic there, and then with a syncopation. But again, as soon as I describe some of the ingredients, I feel like I'm losing the meaning of that statement of the soul, of the statement of the storytelling, the narrative quality, regardless of the style, the genre, or the toolbox of which composer you take, like a Mozart cadenza. Okay, broken sixths, broken thirds, and you can also do in the left hand with the 16th notes in a large scale pattern of octaves of accompaniment pattern that is usually that we attribute to an Italian composer, the Alberti bass. But in fact, then you have these subtle shiftings of style between young Beethoven with Haydn or late Mozart with early Beethoven, where you can sense today the transition that goes from one style to another, or late Beethoven into Schumann and Schubert especially. And Schubert to inhabit this imaginary land of Schubert, because he is so not only innocent and simple, but just so genuine, without trying to be complexifying his harmonic structure. So of course he loves using also in harmonic modulations, but generally what justifies it is to play on the piano, in fact, a song. He wrote so many without words. So when I compose, I don't start at all with the style of any other composer. It's the get-go is my thought, my expression, my world. Of course, it is filled with innuendos of other composers, naturally. Not I would be arrogantly full of myself. But it's not in the case of improvisation where I willingly enter in the musical idiom of a given composer for a section or another or something. In composing, writing, I mean, not improvising, there is intuition and thought process at the same time, elimination, structurization, organization. In fact, redundancies are taken out, and in order to keep the essence and bring it at its purest, the melodic line, the phrasing, the contrapoint, the harmonization, if any, or what and how, modal or not tonal at all. So you choose something and you go through it. And you choose it as a path that you want to explore. Perhaps it's reminiscent of something while you discover it ahead. It's a little bit of both. But in improvisation, you don't do in real time the inevitable thought process of the writing. So it's more, it's full of perhaps sections you would cut in the writing once you think about it. Would it be a transition to a section, or just go to a section without transition, or build a transition with some other elements? In other words, in real time, yes, you can think complex and subtle and sometimes evocative of other composers, as I said in the beginning. But ultimately, in my case, when I compose, it's my music. When I improvise, it's as if I just take a stroll in imagine land, in daydream land, and I, in every composer at the same time a little bit, but not planned. It's almost like as if I let myself be guided by the, call it intuition. And I wondered, long time, is there any advantage on the reflection versus the intuition? Same as for composing, improvising, as for interpretation and learning a piece from the objective score. Everybody should sound the same, technically, if everybody plays from the same edition. But even so they don't, even from the same teacher, and so they don't. It means that there are some things that are so personal in the way of the expression. How agitated is agitated, how turmoiled is turmoiled, how driven is driven, how fun is fun. And it's nothing worse than artificially, like, because we try to be cute, because it's surprising. But we know it's surprising, but of course it's no more surprising because we've heard since. But in Haydn, and I think that is a major difficulty, how to bring out the audacity of the past, inspired at the time, and bold at the time. For us to appear bold by conviction, not just by restating it. Feels like an actor telling a line that doesn't believe in. Then it's not believable by the listener. Perhaps it has to be just then, it's just said. And let the modulation unexpected be, or the hint of another harmony that is not part of the key, be the surprise, which anyway appears as a surprise because you interrupt to restart. So that is difficult because a theater actor has to give the meaning to the things as if he doesn't know how they go to end. But of course they know. Like, you know, when you know your the masterpiece you play from memory till the end, you know how it's going to end. So how do you inhabit it with apparently spontaneous expression of emotion or storytelling? How do you define it in the style and say mezzo forte in Schubert is not the same as in Beethoven? Why? How do you hear it as a symphonic piece that is perhaps hinted when you play the opening of the C minor Schubert sonata? Compared to, or because Schubert was completely taking Beethoven as a template for his orchestral works and went beyond. But on his own, without learning or studying the way we think about it today. And so when we play, do we need to think that then this cannot be because it's Schubert compared to Beethoven? Because Beethoven is often more violent in his expression of anger or of expression of breaking with the rule of the expected. It's a very romantic era time where you break the form and you express your feelings and you don't start with an introduction. It's not an introduction, it's a theme, but even so, it seems like the more you go like Chopin's B flat, you think, but inharmonically, his relative major third degree becomes in minor and the opening is not in C sharp minor, though it appears like by surprise, like the diminished 7 drop. Schubert starts it on a tonic. It doesn't go. He could have, didn't. With the he could have, didn't. One opens the Pandora's box and then the genie is out. No, we have to remain, and we need to remain very disciplined, while innerly very free in our thoughts. You can think outside of the box and play within the box. Doesn't hurt. As a matter of fact, the intention then brings you to another dimension of the piece, perhaps the tempo. Could be. Or because then the grace notes are too fast. But if you do slower, then it's not a finale, it's more of a calm finale. But what is an allegro for Beethoven compared to even Rachmaninoff when you do the E flat minor etude? Grounded with this ostinato and the pumping chords and the 2 against 3 and the weak finger playing the melody, not overwhelming it, but you cannot play it soft because it lacks gravitas. So he's pumping these repeated notes, but on the other hand, they overwhelm the decay of the sound. And of course, there is no trill to prolong it, nor percussive instrument, you sound like what you do, the drilling. But in fact, in a resonance of the voice or wind instrument, you would do a vibrato, the opposite of the decay of the piano. So you can say the chords are the energy for the melody, compensating its decay. On paper it looks great, but in reality it's difficult because in fact by playing the chords too loud or too heavy, therefore killing the flow of the as much as possible, holding the melody before the next note. Then you hear combination of the two. In other words, you hear everything that moves and not as much the things that hold in terms of values. Well, that's a nice Freudian slip. But it's true. You have to think about it, because when you hear it in your head, you hear it. You don't sing it to yourself. Mi, re, mi, fa, re, si, re, fa, la. Well, that's a caricature of the example. In fact, I'm being so much devil's advocate of myself that it's no point. No, I think then we can consider that the interpretation has to also vehicle things that are not meant to be heard in their entirety because of the instrument's capacity, and the composers took it in account and decided that it's worth it. So in a way, the intention is memorized by the listener, and then you follow the melody even if the note decays on the first note of the melody. Many teachers could speak half pedals, voiced chords, to maintain without overwhelm the melody. And of course, if you play faster, then of course the melody decays less. And it doesn't have the gravitas, the intensity of the depth of the downbeat being on the tonic. Pinky he plays two keys together because he put so much pressure from the forearm to the wrist to the palm to the finger to the articulation to the tip of the very finger. Why didn't he write it on the thumb, which he does in the recapitulation? Not in the beginning. So we don't have the choice when we play the piece as written. We have to play it as written, as meant, as suggested, as hinted, as daydreamed, as somewhere we have at some level, after we know it well enough, very well, more than very well, like a Bach Goldberg variation or an etude by Rachmaninoff equally, we have to immerse ourselves in their hearing of the composers in question. And then bring it out, not because we recite it politely or obediently or respectfully. It's not disrespect then to do rubato. It's not disrespect then to delay a note with another for the harmony with the melody. It's just a way to bring out what you find that the instrument cannot do. That's probably why Cortot did this, not only him, but mostly attributed to him. This location between bass and melody, this way you hear the melody and the harmony, but they're together written. I haven't heard Chopin play, I hope he did, but who knows? Did he do in the opening of the fourth ballade? Voices that come in one after the other and blossom like a morning sunshine in major until the theme starts in minor and restate to retell us the sorrow of its expression. Then a hope to the relative major. Dominant. of the arpeggios, the lament thirds, and the polyphony that it involves, as well as the expression of lament. And so, yeah, he notated it. Is the notation the finalization of the interpretation through the indications? Or is it guided tour for your own visitation? That's a subtle thing to do, because you have a responsibility as a teacher to guide the student to be in the right track of the expected stylistic, in this case of Chopin, rubato, but tasteful. And who defines taste? Everybody on their own. And agree to disagree for everybody else's. Too often the case. And then I find that once you've done the full circle of this, notation versus intention, intention versus freedom of expression within the text that we take either by intuition or by conviction or by perhaps even arrogance to some people it could appear, or I think it's because it becomes inevitable. No matter what you're told, no matter how much you read, how much you heard, how much you understood, the structure, the phrase, the style, the organization of the harmonic progression, all the ingredients, and then all the fingering, phrasing, articulation, pedaling, all the elements of coating, the dressing, cooking the elements that are thematic, melodic, and all that. But then once all that is said, done, understood, digested, eventually rejected or admired by somebody doing it this or that other different way, comes the point where you have to do it yourself. Ultimately, you play the piece. You don't recite it, you don't declaim it, you do it in a master class or in a conference as a scholar, but as a performer, you take your chance. And sometimes you start what you planned, and somehow on the spot, on the moment, is it stage fright, or in the opposite stage, if non-fright, but some kind of second state of awareness that, yeah, but I cannot not do this at this spot, even if it says not in the score. And this is the subtle moment where the teacher has to be very careful not to stifle the student's intuition, nor to allow any goes, because the two would be wrong. How do you find this kind of tolerance within the structure of the discipline and the soundscape in which you inhabit the piece, because how you hear it, literally from the reading, inner hearing, not the outer hearing. And then you prepare it, you organize it, and then the note comes out, and you go, oh, this is softer than I wish, but then oh, but now it's louder, so I'll be perhaps making a phrase drop after I rose. And then you start telling it. So the harmonizations, yes, they bring the mood, but the melody is the statement, is the inner world. And the accompaniment in triplets on the eighth notes by two, it's some kind of inner turmoil or inner swaying. Of course, because I'm making it up, I don't worry about being right or wrong. But stylistically, yes. What didn't plan when I started. And when I restart, it will bring me somewhere else, since I don't have a written score to follow, execute. And while doing so, the journey is the destination is the journey. Then I give the impression that in fact, it's my statement, even it's through the notes of the composer, and not. And of course, anything that is not Chopin is banal by Chopin's style, because he has this elegance, this, call it genius, call it inspiration. He was an improviser as well, but not only. It was just the idea of the capturing, more than captivating, capturing the mood, the atmosphere, the expression, the revolt, as well as avowal, expression of emotions, contrasting or in construction build up, rather linear, regardless. The statement is in the flow of the events. When it stops, it's gone on still in the heart head. It lives inside oneself, like the pieces we play or the pieces we imagine. Perhaps we combine them when we improvise, in this case, which I do. But I think it's with the same meaning of deep immersion by conviction in a statement, in an atmosphere, in a it's not only the ingredients, they are necessary, and they are very necessary rather, but it's the statement you place in the melodic line or repeated notes, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be this or that. It's just that you establish something that ruptures the silence. There's no more silence because you start a note. 2, 3, and harmony or melody. And of course you can say, oh, I've heard that 1,000 times in Tchaikovsky's Scriabin, Rachmaninoff, Chopin. Yes, I agree. Actually, I would say that too. And so what? Just because we're not in their time period, we can still, by proxy or imagination, or rather more than that, emotional connection, be in this micro world or ecosystem of theirs. Thank you for listening.